Hello and welcome to Mad About Superheroes Cartoon Showcase. Today we're going to revisit one of my favorite episodes of G.I. Joe! More specifically, the Season 2 episode of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, Nightmare Assault, written by Marv Wolfman. Wolfman also wrote episodes of Transformers, and along with artist George Perez, he co-created and wrote an impressive run on the New Teen Titans for DC Comics, which is an absolute personal favorite of mine from the era. The popular G.I. Joe Hasbro toy line originated in the 1960s and is credited for creating the term action figure. After a very successful run into the 1970s, the G.I. Joe line of action figures lay dormant for years. That is until the early 1980s relaunch, which exceeded expectations. The cross-promotion of toys, Marvel Comics, and cartoon series were a bona fide smash hit. To say G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero was a phenomenon during the early to mid-1980s is to say the least. By 1986, the franchise had an overwhelming amount of characters. Popular original characters often took a back seat to focus on the newer characters. For example, Duke and Scarlet made room for Flint and Lady J. Cobra Commander and Destro made room for Serpentor and Dr. Mindbender. After all, Hasbro had toys to sell. Unfortunately, with characters multiplying exponentially every year, it was difficult for the cartoon series to keep up. However, the G.I. Joe action figures file cards written by Larry Hama, who wrote the Marvel Comics, excellently provided distinctive personality traits for all the characters, and the writers of the animated series always did their best to incorporate these unique traits into the cartoon series and expand on them. Every so often, a character on the series became the main focus, and he or she would actually get some kind of actual development. The Nightmare Assault episode is a very good example of that. Nightmare Assault is the reason Lowlight became a personal favorite G.I. Joe, and was the reason I had to have a Lowlight action figure when I was a kid. The first horror film series I really got into when I was a kid was A Nightmare on Elm Street. The imaginative nightmare sequences differentiated itself from other movies in the genre. I can't say for sure if the Nightmare Assault episode of G.I. Joe was influenced by the Nightmare on Elm Street film series, but it definitely has a similar tone.
Welcome to my nightmare!
G.I. Joe's Lifeline and Iceberg are in some serious trouble. In the thick of a blizzard and not only under the threat of a giant snake, they are also under attack by Cobra forces. A wounded Iceberg pleads with Lifeline to kill the giant snake, but that conflicts with Lifeline's pacifist beliefs. Iceberg falls through the ice. Though Lifeline tries to reach and grab him, all he grabs hold of is Iceberg's gun. Lifeline chooses to forego his oath and fires the weapon, but the gun transforms into another snake. Lifeline is suddenly overwhelmed by snakes. As he screams in horror, he awakens from this nightmare. Unable to sleep, he finds that Lowlight is also up, despite the late hour. Lowlight, no stranger to nightmares, offers Lifeline some advice.
How do you stand having them every night of your life? You make do. You have no choice.
It turns out that Dr. Mindbender has created a device that caused Lifeline's nightmare, and Serpentor plans to use the device on other Joes as well, in an attempt to weaken their effectiveness as a team. General Hawk leads an assault against a Cobra base, but the mission quickly falls apart, as the G.I. Joe team are taken down by a giant fire-breathing snake. Only Hawk survives the attack. He's plagued with guilt for leading his soldiers to their deaths. Just before he himself falls victim to the fangs of the giant snake, he awakens from his nightmare.
Stop!
While General Hawk confides in Lady J about his dream, a red alert goes off and the Joes head out to face off against the Dreadnoks.
Dreadnoks are raiding the Chandler oil rig.
When the Joes arrive on the scene, the Dreadnoks were expecting them, and they exploit General Hawk's fear from his nightmare. Hawk hesitates for a moment, then orders the Joes to pull back while he handled the snake on his own. Using the giant snake as a distraction, the Dreadnoks set a bomb to blow up an oil rig. Hawk successfully commands his unit to rescue the oil workers before the bomb explodes.
This man aboard! Hold on tight!
However, Hawk's moment of hesitation is all Dr. Mindbender needs to report to Serpentor that he can undoubtedly crush the G.I. Joe team with their nightmares within weeks. However, Serpentor is impatient.
I want results now! This I command!
Hawk sees Lifeline for a checkup and discusses his nightmares, and it turns out that he's had other reports from other Joes concerning nightmares as well. On a date at the drive-in, a sleep-deprived Iceberg nods off. Fast asleep, Dr. Mindbender seizes the opportunity, and the giant snake rears its ugly head once again. Iceberg is then startled awake by his nightmare. The G.I. Joes are physically affected by the lack of sleep, and can't focus on anything but their fears. General Hawk tries to give them a pep talk, but he's suddenly interrupted. Some Joes try to sleep while others try to distract themselves from sleep. Tensions are running high, which results in a brawl between Leatherneck and Wetsuit. Before Cross Country can get in the mix, the fight is broken up by Lowlight and his no-nonsense attitude.
Now, cool it, or I'll show you a real nightmare.
Lowlight then falls asleep, and he's quickly in the midst of a nightmare. Haunted by his past and childhood trauma, Lowlight is belittled by the voice of his abusive father. His childhood fear of the dark is also exploited. However, no stranger to nightmares and facing his fears, Lowlight is not as easy of a target for Cobra, and much to Serpentor's dismay, Lowlight emerges from his nightmare triumphant. Beaming from his restful night of sleep, Lowlight enters the mess hall in a good mood, but the other Joes are less than cheerful. Visibly fatigued, they begin to open up with each other about the exact context of their dreams. They all have one thing in common, the giant snake. They deduce that Cobra is the obvious culprit, and Hawk puts a plan into effect to stop Cobra. Serpentor scolds Dr. Mindbender and continues to press him for immediate results. Serpentor orders Dr. Mindbender to enter the Joe's dreams and destroy them once and for all. Mindbender hooks himself up to his device and complies with Serpentor's command. The G.I. Joe team undergoes a similar process, linking themselves together, with Lowlight as the focal point to fight Cobra while they sleep. They get off to a rocky start. Hawk hesitates to give orders. Dialtone loses his ability to speak. Mainframe transforms into a cyborg, and Lady J is swept off her feet, and not by Flint this time around. General Hawk psychs himself up and leaps into action. He pulls his team together. They present a united front, hands locked in a circle. Dr. Mindbender emerges through the center of them, loud and threatening to destroy them.
Cobra will destroy you all!
The Joes stand their ground until Lowlight rides in to show Dr. Mindbender what nightmares are really made of. Lowlight turns the tide in the Joes' favor, and Dr. Mindbender awakens from his own nightmare screaming. He then destroys his own creation.
G.I. Joe will return after these messages.
This I command!
Now, back to G.I. Joe.
The Nightmare Assault episode of G.I. Joe has an impressive ensemble cast of voice actors. Ed Gilbert as General Hawk. Gilbert also voiced 3030 in Brave Star, and went on to voice the Mandarin in the 90s Iron Man animated series. Arthur Berghart as Iceberg. Berghart pulled triple duty, voicing G.I. Joe's Stalker and Cobra villain Destro as well. He also provided the voice of the combined form of the Constructicons, Devastator, and G1 Transformers. Brian Cummings as Dr. Mindbender. Cummings also voiced Professor Funt in Denver the Last Dinosaur. Dick Goiter as Serpentor. Goiter also voiced Rodimus Prime in the aforementioned Transformers cartoon. Stan Wojino as the Paphicist Lifeline, and Mary McDonald as one of the most recognizable fan-favorite Joes, Lady J. Last but definitely not least, I have to mention Charlie Adler as Lowlight. Adler also contributed his voice talents to the aforementioned Brave Star series as the main villain Tex Hex. He was also the voice of Rowdy Piper in Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling cartoon.
Yo, Joe! He'll fight for freedom wherever there's trouble. G.I. Joe is there.
G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero has a totally awesome 80s theme song composed by Robert J. Walsh and Johnny Douglas. The duo also composed the theme for the criminally underrated Dungeons & Dragons cartoon. They also created the music for the Transformers. Lowlight's nightmare expands on his action figure file card concerning his traumatic past. His file card states, as a child in North Dakota, Lowlight was afraid of the dark, timid with animals, and shy to loud noises. Until one precarious hunting expedition with his father, Lowlight somehow lost his way in the impenetrable darkness. He was found 3 weeks later with his flashlight, .22 rifle, and a grin from ear to ear. 10 years later, he was an instructor in the Army Marksmanship Program in Fort Benning and a self-taught expert in image intensification. The Joes like to have Lowlight along for the ride. They know that if something gets really hairy, and that's bound to happen sooner or later, all they have to do is wait until dark. It doesn't matter what field of fire the bad guys control, the night belongs to Lowlight. The Nightmare Assault episode's writer, Marv Wolfman, adds an overbearing father.
Do you hear what I say? Dad? I always said you were a wimp, Cooper. Scared of the dark, weak. You made me ashamed you were my son.
Lowlight's file card suggests he's timid with animals. In the episode, he has a more specific fear of rats. The episode also includes his fear of the dark. More importantly, the episode focuses on Lowlight's perseverance. Though he's not a top-ranking officer in G.I. Joe, it's obvious his fellow Joes know he means business.
Cut it out! All of you!
G.I. Joe will return after these messages.
Serve the public trust, protect the innocent, uphold the law.
RoboCop.
Now, back to G.I. Joe.
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
As mentioned, as a kid, the first horror film series I really got into was A Nightmare on Elm Street. I had seen other horror movies sporadically that scared the heck out of me, especially Halloween, but A Nightmare on Elm Street was right up my alley. The fantastical dream sequences in the film compelled me. Intentional or not, the Nightmare Assault episode of G.I. Joe has a very A Nightmare on Elm Street tone to it. The banding together in the same dream to fight their common enemy actually predates A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors, by a year. Although the episode could have been inspired by the underrated 1984 film Dreamscape as well, which all have very similar plots. Standing in for Freddy Krueger is the giant snake, haunting all the Joe's nightmares. As if a phallic snake could stand in for the devilish charisma of Robert Englund's Freddy Krueger. Okay, but a giant snake is a dead giveaway that Cobra is behind the Joe's nightmares. It's a bit thin that it took the Joes so long to figure it out. The reason given in the episode is that they're too tired to think straight. Which is fine, but Cobra is 99% the cause of any dilemma in the series. Also, Serpentor's impatience often tips his hand in the Joe's favor, and this episode is no exception to that.
I want results now! This I command!
I love the nightmare sequences in this episode. The imagery is imaginative and plays well with the Joe's individual fears. It's important for kids to see that their heroes can experience fear and are flawed human beings, and hopefully realize that just like their heroes, they can overcome their fears too. Nightmares are such a relatable thing because everybody has had them at one time or another. I related to Lowlight's fear of the dark, which is probably the most relatable source of fear for most kids. I especially like Hawk's nightmare and his fear of leading the Joes to their deaths. His fear wasn't just about him. It was about the fear of failing to safeguard the lives of his soldiers, which is pretty deep for a kid's cartoon. I like the idea of a special missions force that goes up against something that they weren't particularly trained for. The Nightmare Assault episode of G.I. Joe has top-notch animation with a darker atmosphere than usual, which was a welcome change of pace, specifically the fantastical storyline, although not the first or last episode to stray a bit from the action formula and into the fantastical. For example, Phantom Brigade, which features the spirits of deceased warriors in the service of Cobra, or Once Upon a Joe, which features fairy tale versions of G.I. Joe and Cobra. Nightmare Assault is an absolute standout and a personal favorite episode of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero.
G.I. Joe!
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Cartoon Showcase, and as always, thanks so much for letting your geek flags fly with Mad About Superheroes.
This is the new G.I. Joe Havoc.
Nothing's too tough for Havoc! Nothing's too rough for Havoc!
Look, Cobra Ferret! After him! Yo, Joe!
Cobra's got to face much more than Havoc when Havoc's on the go. Cause out of Havoc comes a big surprise that gives more firepower to G.I. Joe!
G.I. Joe Havoc comes with driver, other Joe and Cobra figures and equipment sold separately.
Yo, Joe!